Let's start actually in the USA then. So there have been a big set of riots that have been happening as a result of um, ICE going round and threatening people and rounding up immigrants or potential illegal immigrants and so forth. Now, I'm not going to sit here and claim that I know absolutely everything about what's going on there, but what I can say that from an outsider's point of view, it is quite concerning that that happening. I know that popular Substacker Ken Klippenstein was or has written a piece about speaking to local people in Los Angeles, and they're saying that it's not just affecting a multitude of communities over in Los Angeles, but also is affecting, a lot of American citizens with what is happening at the moment. Now, there are a lot of different things in at play to do with Gavin Newsom and left wing politics, right wing politics, and so forth. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save those questions for Tom Luongo, who's going to be back on the podcast at the end of June, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about as we always do, because I know that he has done some very good analysis about what's happening in terms of are the riots government funded, and are they being funded by left-wing politics? Now, I don't have an answer for that, but I know that himself, also Chris Martinson over at Peak Prosperity, have mentioned similar things as well. So let's see what happens moving forward. As I said, Tom Luongo will be on the podcast at the end of the month. I'll ask some questions to him, but all I know is that what's happening isn't quite right. And if you look at the history of the United States of America, and if you look at the history of Mexico, I know that a lot of Mexicans will more than likely say that places like California and so forth rightly belong to them. Again, look at the American-Mexican War and look at the events that led up to that. But I appreciate that's a Mexican point of view. I'm not saying that's the right point of view, but again, it's important to understand, I think, history of these areas as well. Moving on from the USA, and let's have a look at a bunch of things that have been happening back home in the UK. Now, you may or may not have heard of a guy called Tommy Robinson. He has been very vocal with regards to immigration policies and so forth in the UK. He was put in effectively solitary confinement for a very long time this year for ultimately speaking the truth. And because the truth goes against the government narrative, he was made an example of. So he was plopped into jail and again put into solitary confinement. He has since come back out, which is good. And again, you don't have to like him. You could hate him if you really want. But the point of this is that last week, and let me just read that full article. Last week, at a restaurant called Hawksmoor, they basically asked him to leave because he was making others feel uncomfortable. Now, you don't have to like someone. You don't have to enjoy their politics or what they say or what they do. But the fact that a restaurant has asked Tommy Robinson to leave because he was making others feel uncomfortable, unfortunately, that sets a very dangerous precedent. And for those that are not based in the UK or not from the UK, you might have heard stories about Sir Keir Starmer and the current government and previous governments trying to quell free speech, and you might have thought, well, it sounds a bit crazy. Well, I can tell you it's true because it's happening. And Tommy, again, according to what I'm reading here, he wasn't doing anything. He was just enjoying a meal, enjoying a conversation with friends, and he wasn't breaking the law, wasn't causing a scene, not causing a disturbance. But he was asked to leave because apparently he was making others feel uncomfortable. The X post that I'm reading is from a guy called Harvey Proctor, and I'll quote what he says, and I quote, "Let me be clear. I vehemently disagree with much of what Tommy Robinson espouses. I find some of his actions and what he has said deplorable. But in a civil society, we do not eject people from public spaces because we dislike their views or reputation. We engage, we disagree, and we remain civil. I am reminded of the quote, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That's the cornerstone of a free, civil, and democratic society. By yielding to mob discomfort, you've chosen cowardice over principle and now part of a cultural tide that says dissent must be silenced, not debated. I'd never thought I'd see this kind of intolerance in modern Britain, but here we are. End quote. And I agree with that. You don't have to agree with someone's politics. You don't have to like them. You don't have to love them. You could hate them for all you want. But part of having an open culture is that you have open opinions. And like them or loathe them, when you, as a restaurant, Hawksmoor, when you ask someone to leave because that person is making others feel uncomfortable, then you should ask why the others are feeling uncomfortable in the first place. It's a very dangerous precedent. As I said, that's the purpose of saying that, because I know that there are people out there that are not from the UK, that might not know what's going on too much in the UK. And when people like myself and other commentators, whether it be on X or Substack or wherever, when we are saying that free speech is being disintegrated, it's being quelled, we are speaking the truth. These sorts of things are happening. Hawksmoor, I won't read out the full comment from Hawksmoor, but they do go on to say that the party, i.e. Tommy Robinson, did leave peacefully and politely on request. Again, the fact that they put this was not about politics or beliefs underneath is laughable, to say the least. Sticking in with the UK though, and another thing that's concerning, and again, part of the globalist playbook, part of things that have been happening, that have been mentioned, that have been spoken about in Parliament, is digital IDs, and it is very, very likely that the UK is going to see digital IDs being implemented. Now, there's two ways to look at it. You can look at it from a point of view and go, well, it's a good thing because of X, Y, and Z. Or you can take the contrarian point of view and say, well, hang on a minute, this is just another power grab. This is another way to exert control over the masses. I'm sure with most things in life, there will be pros and cons. Personally, I would be dead against it, having some form of digital ID being given to me by my government. Count me out. I'm not up for that. Also, in the EU in general, of course, they are speaking quite frequently about central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. They are talking a lot about introducing them. Last time I checked, they want them in by October of this year. And if they're going to do that, then a lot's got to happen between now and then. So I don't know whether that's going to happen. But if we look at the globalist playbooks and this element of control and how they want to keep taking an inch, taking an inch, taking an inch. Eventually, they'll take so many inches that most people will be utterly clueless as to what's happened. Of course, not yourselves for watching this video, because the whole reason you look at it contrarian capitalist, I imagine, is because you think differently, you want to be outside of the box, and you want to be outside of the system. But in general, for the masses, for most of the population, I would imagine that they are relatively oblivious as to what is happening, how it's happening, and probably more importantly, why it's happening. So we've got CBDCs in Europe or the EU that are looking to be brought into play. In the UK, people are getting kicked out of restaurants because they're making other people feel uncomfortable. And on top of that, the government are openly, although they have been saying that since Blair actually in the 90s, have been talking quite consistently about bringing in a digital ID. For me, that's just another form of control. It's another way to exert power over the masses. However, I am sure there would be one or two advantages pragmatically from bringing it in. But again, that's what they'll sell you on. And if you want freedom, you want liberty and so forth, if you keep letting them take what they're taking, then it will be too late. Again, keeping in the UK and keeping on energy, we've had some really good people on the podcast recently. Robert Bryce, Roger Pelkey Jr. two really good guests. Coming up next week, Dr. Anis Al-Haji is going to be on the show. He's going to, I imagine, deep dive into oil, all things oil, and what's going on there. So if you're yet to subscribe to Contrarian Capitalist, please do so, because you'll be notified as and when those podcasts are released. The reason I mention those three people in particular is that with regards to energy, again in the UK, we are continually shooting ourselves in the foot. I'm looking at something from X that I took a photo of, and it comes from possibly the Independent. I don't know the paper, I haven't got it written here, but basically Ed Miliband, who is the energy chap in charge at the moment, has vowed to shut down UK gas fields. And at the same time, we are spending £20 billion in order to buy gas from Norway. So as well as improving the balance sheet of the sovereign wealth fund of Norway, again, what the UK wants to do is to increase its bills for its people, because what we don't want to do is to go into, I believe it's Lincolnshire, where there has been a massive gas field, or there is a massive gas field underneath quite large parts of Lincolnshire. Again, if you're not familiar with the UK, Lincolnshire is in the northeast, mainly east of England. It is a very large county in terms of square meters, very, very large, one of the largest that we have. There is a massive natural gas field underneath it, and by fracking and by extracting that natural gas from under the soil in Lincolnshire, what should happen is that the UK will be able to provide a lot more natural gas for its citizens, and of course energy abundance. That would mean that bills go down. That could also mean that if there's spare natural gas, the UK could send that over to the EU or other parts of the world, and they could profit from that. Now, I'm sure yourself listening to myself, we think, well, that makes good business sense. As a country, we should be energy independent, or any country should be energy independent, and that the UK should do that. But no, because it goes against this net zero rhetoric and the fact that we must have as many wind turbines as possible, and we've banned fracking, and it's got to be solar panels, and it's got to be as green as possible. And because I think the globalists are well and truly in Ed Miliband's head, we've decided that we're not going to touch this gas field, and we're going to continue to spend £20 billion buying gas we don't need from Norway. Make it make sense. That is a phrase that's quite popular on the internet. Make it make sense. Doesn't make sense to me why you do that. If you're going to become richer and you're going to enrich your citizens, what you need to do is to provide as much energy as possible. A common thing that I've always had an issue with is the lies that have been told by various governments and people with regards to how green energy is. If you look at wind turbines, they produce a lot of noise pollution. If you look at solar panels take a lot of components, and there's a lot of mining that needs to be done in order to get to the silver and the copper that are needed for the compartments or the parts of solar panels. And of course, that's a lot of mining. Well, mining, although it's getting better, is not the greenest thing in the world. So therefore, as much as we're talking about green energy and being greener and cleaner for the future, what's happening is all this mining is probably offsetting all of that. Now, I think that if you ask most people in the world, would they want a greener and cleaner energy world? I think most people will say yes. I agree with that. I would like that. But solar and wind aren't the answer. You need baseload energy. And baseload energy is coal, natural gas, oil, and nuclear. Now, coal is arguably out of those four the dirtiest thing of the four. Oil is used in so many things, pretty much everything, that to try and get rid of that, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's going to be very, very difficult. So you're left with two, natural gas and nuclear. Now, natural gas is in abundance as far as I'm aware. And again, going into the UK here, big natural gas field underneath Lincolnshire. But if you're not going to look at natural gas because you don't want to, or you've banned fracking, then you look at nuclear. Now, again, we've seen with various things in the UK, various energy policies, nuclear plants are taking a lot longer than they should because people either don't want them in their backyards, or someone complains about something, or we can't get a contract sorted with EDF, or we did have a contract with EDF and they were on the hook for any delays, but because our government dilly-dallied, then the contract's still there, but now the taxpayers are on the hook. So really, EDF have got no incentive to complete it. I think that's Hinkley Point I'm referring to. We've got Sizewell over in Suffolk, so in and around the Ipswich area, over in East Anglia, and Sellafield up in Cumbria, where, again, we have the potential in the UK to do all these things, but the will of the people, I would imagine, is probably there, but the will of the government doesn't seem to be there. And again, that's where we go back to who is telling these people in government what they should and shouldn't do with regards to energy policy. How many brown envelopes are being handed out? What incentives are being handed out? I think it was Charlie Munger that says, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome." So things just aren't making sense at the moment. And I'm all for Doge. I'm all for a UK Doge. That would be absolutely brilliant. I think that would be fantastic. But if you're in a position of power and you're getting a lot of incentives, your aim probably is then to keep that position of power, and you will probably do all that you can in order to keep that power. So does that mean serving the people? Well, no, it doesn't. I've long advocated that in the UK, and you could argue this could happen anywhere in the world, that politicians should go back to where they were in, I think it was the 1810s, 1820s in the UK, where they'd done it for free. They'd done it for free, and because they'd done it for free, you would imagine that at the time they had the interests of the country at heart and the interests of the people at heart. So there you are. If you're going to take something away from this video, it's we should go back to politicians basically doing their job for free, not being paid large amounts of cash and not having expenses, etc., etc. They should be able to do it for free, because if you're going to do it for free, that probably means that you're very entrepreneurial, because you're going to need your base income in order to then go and do that work for free. It's an idea that I've long advocated for. So that's the UK. That's Tommy Robinson, that's energy, that's Ed Miliband, that's the current government. There are murmurings around and about of, various war fronts. Again, I'm looking at an article now, and it's 10th of June. Austrian school gunman went around and killed 9 people. Apparently, he was a 21-year-old former pupil. They've got Russian drones that are buzzing around Kiev. Apparently, they're getting more destructive. I don't trust BBC Verify as far as I could throw them. Apparently, there's 60 people that work for BBC Verify, and I imagine the amount of BS that they like to serve us doesn't even warrant reading that article. However, they're talking about debunking AI fakes as US protests spark online disinformation, which is richer than the BBC because they probably spew out more disinformation than most other people. What else is going on in the world? Looking at these headlines, things in Israel and Gaza, they're not going to go away anytime soon. Again, we've got a lot of issues in the USA, and I'd advise you go and look at some history between America and Mexico. Also look at the US-Mexican War and have a look at that. I've got to go back and read it as well, in all fairness, because I think we need a balanced policy on that. And again, having Gavin Newsom, the California governor, getting involved, calling the President Trump deranged and so forth. I think that's pot calling kettle black is how we would say that in England. It's very rich, coming from the same governor who oversaw very, very bad wildfires in LA because they decided to reduce spending on keeping, water holes in reserve or whatever it was at the time. So again, very rich, coming from Gavin Newsom over there in California, as I get my counties right. Let's quickly go on to the markets, quickly have a look at silver. A couple of things on silver actually this week. First of all, Uranium Investor and myself, we've teamed up to do a two-part series. Part one, the silver bull thesis, that came out today. I'll link to that for those that are not watching live. I'll link to that in a bit. For those that are watching live, if you head over to either Uranium Investor or Contrarian Capitalist, you'll be able to see that article. It's Q&A part one, the silver bull thesis. It's available to everyone. The content was or is about the fundamentals for silver. So although looking at the silver price now, it's $36.52 at the time of doing this video. In the last week or so, silver's gone up by a couple of dollars. There's a lot of euphoria, quite rightly so, around it. However, the two-part Q&A isn't as a result of that euphoria. We're looking at the fundamentals of why silver is a very good play moving forwards. So again, if you're watching this live, go and check out contrariancapitalist.substack.com, and you can go and read that article and listen to the audio. I've done some audio for that. You can listen to that for free. Part two is out on Thursday morning. So Thursday morning Mexico time. If you're in Europe, it's going to be mid-afternoon, 2 or 3 o'clock. And that is looking at, again, touching on silver a little bit. It's also going to look at gold, also look at a little bit of Bitcoin, and it's going to look at nuclear and look at everything energy related and what the thoughts are moving forward. I'll just say a massive thank you to Uranium Investor, because he came up with the idea and also provided all the questions. I've provided the audios and written responses to the questions. So we're working in tandem on it. And again, part one's out already. Part two is out on Thursday. On Wednesday, the 11th, so that's tomorrow, Don Zavet is back on the podcast. He is an expert in all things mining stocks. So I'm hopefully going to dig deep, pardon the pun, into various mining things that are going on, because if you've got any form of miners in your portfolio, I imagine most of them are doing quite well, not all of them. So we're going to deep dive into the miners and what's going on. When he was on last time, which was a few months ago, ultimately his belief was, if you think that gold and silver, gold's going to go to 5,000, 10,000, whatever number, and you think silver's going to go to $50, $80, $100, then the chances are your mining stocks are going to do quite well. Again, that's not all of them. There are companies out there that are better than others. Point being, he's on the podcast tomorrow. And as always, podcasts are released to paid subscribers first before being released to the general public. So if you want to listen to all the podcasts before I run it for anyone else, by all means, do become a paid subscriber. By doing that, you'll also get access to the weekly wrap newsletter, the weekly open newsletter. So again, it's an overview of both the commodities markets and the general stock markets. And of course, the monthly wrap video and chart deck that is done with Chris Steadley over at Live Sport Commodity Corner. You'll also have access to the full archive of posts on the Contrarian Capitalist. But looking at the gold price and silver price now, gold, again, silver hovering 36.50, gold, 36.50 US dollars, I should say, gold hovering around 3,320. So what we're seeing with the gold and silver ratio as well, if I just bring that up, and I posted about this as a note on Substack earlier on in the day, but if we look at the gold and silver ratio, so if you're not familiar with that, it's the amount of ounces of silver that you can buy for the same price as an ounce of gold. And I'm looking at the 5-year chart here, and what we can see is that we've reached a high point. Again, this is in the last 5 years or so, 105.84, and that was only in April of this year. So that basically means that for 1 ounce of gold, you could have bought 105 ounces of silver. Looking at a much longer historical chart, again, the ratio, it's rare that it gets up that high. Even at the moment, it's 90 to 1 or 90.62 to 1. That's still incredibly high. So I've written about this before in terms of a gold and silver arbitrage. that what you could do, and this is not a financial recommendation, this is not financial advice. What you could do is, because that gold and silver ratio is very high, and in my opinion, it's likely to go back down moving forwards. What you could do is purchase, let's just say 90 ounces of silver today. And if that ratio goes down to 45, well, then what you could do is sell your silver and then buy 2 ounces of gold. So at the moment, we've got a ratio of 1 to 90. So if you bought 90 ounces of silver and that ratio went down, you've still got 90 ounces of silver. But because the ratio is 1 to 45, you could sell your silver and then buy 2 ounces of gold. So you would then have doubled your ounces of gold without doing anything, because you're just buying the right metal at the right time. I wrote about that in an article. I also looked at the platinum to gold ratio. Again, I'm not going to say that's breaking out at the moment, but it's certainly got a bit healthier. If I just bring that up. So if I look at platinum to gold, so the platinum to gold ratio at the moment is 0.36. So in effect, it's taking about 3 ounces of platinum to buy an ounce of gold. And if we go back and look at the chart, again, 2008, the ratio sat at about 2.2. So back in 2008, for 1 ounce of platinum, you could have bought 2.23 ounces of gold. For 1 ounce of platinum at the moment, you can buy 0.36 ounces of gold. There's a massive swing there. And it's also why in that same article, I wrote about the platinum to gold ratio and how that could have a massive impact moving forwards. Although in the last week we've seen silver increase significantly in price, gold consolidating, the other thing to take into consideration is that the DXY, so the dollar index, that's hovering around 99 at the moment, but also the stock markets. So the stock markets have remarkably achieved a pretty decent V-shaped recovery. A very decent V-shaped recovery, which is rare, and not a lot of people saw that coming. For those of you that follow the weekly wrap, weekly open, you'll know that I've been calling for a blow off top. I still think that's going to happen. Ultimately, I think the indices are going to go much higher. It doesn't necessarily make sense why they're going to go much higher, but the belief is that they're going to go much higher. And then when they get to whatever crazy levels they get to, then that's a case of watch out below, because that would normally mean that there'll be some form of big recession. That's my personal belief. I've been writing about that for months, and I take a little bit of pride in saying that so far so good and it's working out, but there's still a long way to go. The point being that strong stock markets are going to likely have an impact or put a cap on gold and silver prices for the moment. Ultimately, in the very long term, the thesis is going to be that the Federal Reserve, Bank of England and so forth, they are likely to come to the rescue in terms of financials, i.e. quantitative easing. And should they do that, which time or history has shown it's happened before, chances are it's likely going to happen again. What will happen as a result is that will take, that currency printing will take 18 to 24 months to work through the financial plumbing. And then as a result of that, when you've got more currency supply and you've got similar demand, so yes, currency supplies increased, but the demand remains the same. For example, economics 101 means that there's got to be a recorrelation between supply and demand. That means that prices will go up. And again, that is inflation. Now, what's that got to do with gold and silver? Well, in times of inflation and geopolitical challenges, i.e., things that we discussed at the start of the video, a potential hot war, which the EU desperately wants, and other parts of the world might flare up. In those circumstances, which I believe are coming, as I don't like saying that, but let's be realistic. In those scenarios and in those cases, gold is the go-to thing. Now, you could argue Bitcoin as well. I don't know a ridiculous amount about Bitcoin to make that argument. I'm trying to get some Bitcoin people to come onto the Contrarian Capitalist to talk about Bitcoin and to share their thoughts about Bitcoin. but I'll put Bitcoin in that category for argument's sake. But in safe haven times, gold's got 5,000 years of history. Silver, in my opinion, is money. Silver, again, normally will outpace gold in terms of percentage increases. So in the next commodity super cycle, which we are possibly at the start of, we might get a big economic recession moving forwards. That might see a decrease in gold and silver prices because people sell off the family silver, so to speak. And then when that gets to a bottom, whatever number that's going to be, I would say then, if it's me, that's the place I would go. I'd back up the truck and go all in if there's any available. Because after that, when the QE and the currency that starts going through the system, I mean, it's going to go parabolic. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not just saying this, and I'm not going to put this in the title for clickbait. I would not be surprised to see gold at 5 figures, so $10,000 plus. I would not be surprised as a result of gold being that high to then see silver at triple digits, so $100. I firmly believe that's going to happen. I think history has shown that it's happened before, so the chances are it's going to happen again. And therefore, again, not a financial recommendation, not investment advice. If you are yet to take a position in physical metals, the 3 that I say that you should look at: silver, platinum, and gold, and I would do it in that order. Silver, because the gold-silver ratio is still quite high. Platinum, because the platinum to gold ratio is very low, and historically it's been much higher. And gold, because gold is the ultimate safe haven, in my opinion. What you could do is you could buy silver, you could buy platinum, wait for the ratios to get stronger, and then take advantage of that arbitrage, and then buy gold. That's what I'm looking to do. Or you could just go out and buy gold if you really wanted to. Again, it's completely up to you. Do what works for you. But if you believe that these economic and financial issues are going to happen again, I believe they are coming. But if you believe that that's going to happen again, then you want to protect yourself and get planned. Now, the joy of that is that a lot of Western retail, again, not people watching this because you're probably well attuned to metals already, but most of Western retail, hedge funds, etc., are still not paying attention to gold. They're still not paying attention to silver. We've got central banks, are increasing their hoards of gold. Bank of China, Russia, India, Poland, the Netherlands as well. They're all increasing their gold positions. In terms of central banks buying silver, the 2 biggest ones that I know that are doing that are Russia and India. And if we look at, I've got a friend that lives in southern China. If we look at what's going on over there, he says that, people are buying a lot of gold. People are also buying silver. Maybe not as much, but they're buying it. So they've got an understanding over there of what's happening. Us over in the West, and unless you're watching, channels like this and other channels as well, a lot of people aren't paying attention to what's going on. So therefore, we are still in a very good position. We're still very early in this bull market. This will play out for years and years and years, possibly the next decade, 10, 15 years, that this commodity bull market will play out. So it's not too late to buy gold. It's not too late to buy silver. If you want to wait for price corrections, again, do what works for you. What I think is going to happen is that in the next few months to a year, maybe, we're going to see that blow off top in the stock markets. From there, I think all hell's going to break loose. When all hell breaks loose, most things will get sold off at the same time. People will sell their gold and silver to cover various positions. That will drive the price down. I don't know what the number will be. It could be, $30 an ounce for silver. It could go down to $10 an ounce for silver. I honestly don't know, because we don't know the severity of what's lying ahead. The point being that when it gets down to those levels, if it ever gets down to those levels, that, in my opinion, would be the ultimate last buying opportunity. The other way to do it would just be dollar cost average. If you've got, I don't know, $500 spare per month, you could just put $500 in and buy silver, or buy fractions of gold, or buy fractions of platinum if your local bullion dealer does that. Ultimately, do what works for you. The point from this video is to say that there's a lot of crazy crap going along in the world. We're seeing it in the USA at the moment. A lot of interesting things happening in the UK. We've got theatres of war all over the place. We've got stock market's acting incredibly irrationally, even though I said that, they would achieve blow off tops and all-time highs. They've not done that quite yet, but that's my firm belief. And after that, it's all hell breaks loose, and watch out below in terms of stock markets. And if the Fed and the Bank of England and central banks come to the rescue, that is going to mean that there's a lot more QE. And as we've seen before, when that happens, well, currencies get devalued, and then inversely, that pushes up the price of gold and silver. That's the playbook. That's what I think is going to happen moving forwards. As mentioned at the start, for those watching live, there'll be a post that comes out with this. I'll put some links in there. But do go ahead, contrariancapitalist.substack.com. Look for GSR. That's gold silver ratio. I wrote an article on that. So I highly recommend you go and catch that. Also go and listen to Q&A part 1 with Uranium Investor and the silver bull thesis. And that came out this morning. And if you're yet to subscribe to the Contrarian Capitalist, then you could do that for free. Absolutely. If you want to become a paid subscriber, please do so. You get early access to all podcasts. So they get released to paid subscribers before the general public. You'll also have access to the weekly wrap, weekly newsletters, weekly wrap, weekly open newsletters, the monthly wrap, which is a video recording and chart deck with Chris Steadley of LiveScore Commodity Corner, and also access to the full archive. You can also become a founding member, which is a one-off payment. So you pay a set amount, and that is for life. It never renews. And as long as the channel keeps going, I anticipate on doing this for a very, very, very long time. So it will be worth the investment. So there is the option to do that as well. So do head over to contrariancapitalist.substack.com. Hopefully you've learned something from this video, or there are some action points to take away. Thank you very much. And again, watch out for the channel tomorrow, because we've got another layman's terms article, and that podcast with Don Direct will be live to paid subscribers in the afternoon. Adios. Take care.